So I'm not sure about this one. So, but it may get us someplace interesting. This says, in the prayers, we say, Father Garrin and Father John, our clergy. Should it be Garrin and John, our clergy? So, it wouldn't be wrong that way. It's the father is a title of, it's just an address of respect, right?
Yeah.
That's all.
We say George our bishop.
We say George our bishop,
and
right?
We say Don our president.
Right.
Or
Donald our president. So, yeah, maybe it should be just Garrin and John our clergy.
And since Father John is really Canon John, should it change?
That's really, so there's a difference between a personal address, like if you're speaking to someone, and a formal address as if you were writing an address.
Yeah, there's a difference.
Right?
Yeah.
So, if you were writing a letter and addressing a letter to Father John, you would say, the Reverend Canon J.W. Klein, right?
If you're addressing a note, you can say Father John.
Right, exactly. Or if you're just talking to him, you'd say Father John, right?
But can we say...
And there are different ways of doing that. Go ahead.
But I think, we don't know Donald, our president. We
True.
Don't know our bishop, but you are ours, you and Father
Right.
Klein. So that's why that's a bit
That's why it's different?
A little bit personal.
I can go either way. It doesn't bother me, but to have it different, but it wouldn't bother me the other way either. And ultimately, that's all it is, right? I mean, it's just this is all just respect. So it's not wrong to say Garrin and John are clergy.
But
it's not wrong to say Father Garrin and Father John are clergy.
Isn't it just a salutation? It's a salutation to
It's a salutation. It's also part of the problem is that there is no kind of familiar way to address a bishop.
Right.
Right? So the formal address for a bishop is the Right Reverend Mr. Here's another one. While we're talking about address, Reverend is not a title.
It's not?
Reverend is an adjective. So, technically, it's the Reverend Mr. or the Reverend Father.
Oh.
Right?
Really?
Yes. So we've dropped that in most of our formal usage because it seems redundant, right? We no longer call people Mr. and you've already got a formal address there, right? So typically people will get letters to the Reverend Garrin W. Dickinson, right?
Yeah.
But, and that's not wrong, but to say Reverend is wrong, right? I'm not a Reverend, I am the Reverend Mr. Dickinson, right?
Oh, okay.
So that's that's one of those wacky grammar things that no one knows but me.
But that prayer's in the same sentence with
yes, it is. It's all part of the same thing.
Our bishop.
Yeah. In fact, now that I'm thinking, I'll probably get it changed.
No, you're the personal ones, and the people reading will know that.
Well, the problem is, if you're speaking to a bishop, what do you call him? Bishop, right? I usually say, Your Grace.
Right, doesn't mean the same.
That's not necessarily correct, actually, because according to English titles, an archbishop is the equal of a duke, which is Your Grace. Bishops are the equal of an earl, which is sir, or I forget. Anyway, or Your Excellency, something like that. Anyway, but I don't worry about that. people address the king as your grace as well, right?
So if we went up and said, Your Excellency to the bishop, how would he respond?
He just goes with it.
I've
never had any bishop
refute it.
Yeah, I have never had any bishop say, no, wait a minute. Clearly it's a sign that I am of a certain persuasion in my churchmanship, right?
Yeah.
I am a high church Anglo-Catholic.
Yes.
Otherwise I wouldn't say things like that. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. The Diocese of Pittsburgh, which ordained me originally, is very low church, okay, as overall, right?
Wow.
And in fact, with Trinity School for Ministry within the diocese, it's not only low church; it tends to be rather informal low church, right? And so. I arrived at a gathering once, and I forget whether the bishop was hosting it or whether he was just there, but he was kind of at the door, and I came in and said, "Well, hello, Your Grace," and I shook my hand and was very friendly, and the next guy coming up said, "Bob, how are you?" And he didn't bat an eyelash, but then somebody else said, "So, can we call you Bob?" And he said, "That's not my theology." He knew he was had a smile on his face, but so yes.
I have no idea what you're talking about, so I'm going to interject.
Formal address.
Yeah, okay. Thursday night when we had supervisory, and as you know, we have one Lutheran in our group. And Amanda, who is on the altar guild and overworked and underpaid, of course, was talking about the bishop coming.
Yes.
And the fact that there's all this extra work she had to do, and she didn't have any help, blah, 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 blah. Our Lutheran friend says, "He's just a man."
It was a vomit.
Thank you. I'm like honey.
So
What would be the preferred way that we should address the bishop in a few weeks? Just
either bishop is fine, and our bishop is rather low church. He's not into formalities.
Wow.
He has to have someone remind him to get his vestments pressed, right?
No kidding.
Just because it's not something he would notice, right? But he understands that other people do. It's not an issue. It's just like, he says, that's just not something I would think about, right? But early on, he went to a couple of places and people were scandalized that he had wrinkles in his bulb or whatever, so. I know. People get upset about the weirdest things, right? But, so he would not, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have a problem with you calling him George. But that's not our theology, so.
Well, that, I guess, was more of my question. According to our theology, how should we address him?
Yeah. Bishop, Your Grace, sir. It's just a matter of respect. There isn't I've never found a good universal kind of formal but personal address, right? Obviously, I know how to address the envelope, but as far as bishops are concerned, it depends on your relationship.
Yeah.
So technically,
Yes.
now that the man is here,
Yeah.
should we say father or should we say canon?
Father. Right?
I didn't hear it.
Father or
Should they
canon?
address you as father or canon?
He doesn't care.
I don't care.
I know. He doesn't care.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
I address all the canons I know as father. Simply because canon is a position, not a calling, right? Not an office.
So it's not an adjective like reverend?
No, that canon is a noun. Yeah, which is why he's the Reverend Canon. Right? I'm the Reverend Mister, or the Reverend Father. I usually say the Reverend Father just to...
Canon is nothing compared to venerable.
Yeah, so that's true. Venerable is, yeah. So while we're on the subject, archdeacons are the venerable.
Wow.
For whatever it's worth.
So arch means venerable?
No. No, it's just the formal address for an archdeacon. So it's like reverend,
Oh, okay, I get it.
right? So it's an adjective, but it's the formal adjectival address.
Okay, that was a dumb question. Sorry.
No, that's fine. These get confusing as soon as you start talking about them. But.
All these names originated.
Honestly, Pybart, I am not sure.
I always
They're
want
all-
to know again how these names originated.
It all at some point comes out of the Roman Empire or the medieval
That's
tradition,
right.
right?
Yeah, I
the
said
feudal
that.
tradition.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Arch
I don't
comes
know.
from Greek arche.
That's right. Arch is
And
arche, is so like first
Yeah, and
or beginning of
architect.
Beginning.
architecture.
Gotcha.
Although architecture is that's a different word. That's I think that's
But
is
there's
that
the
Latin?
arch. But there's the arch in the architecture and all that.
Yes, but the arch is different than arche. Arche is the Greek for first or principal,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So it's a little hard. It's
It's different.
So
we talked about this
someone's your
before.
arch enemy, they're your number one.
Number one, yeah, number one enemy, right? Archbishop is the number one bishop, right?
Yes.
That sort of thing.
Interesting.
Going back to
Yeah.
Mr., when Garrin and I were married in D.C. 58 years ago, the man introduced himself as Mr.
Yes.
And I never questioned it. I did not know that
Yes.
there was a difference.
So
But it was very
back in the
well-
day, right? So back in the day, low church ministers, Anglican ministers, would call themselves Mister, and that's what everybody else called them, unless they were a doctor, in which case you called them doctor.
No,
Right.
in England you don't say doctor, you say Mr.
Yeah.
Mister.
Okay.
Even if they have.
Yeah, again, it's a mystery.
Even if they have a doctorate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even if they're a doctor, a doctor of medicine.
Oh, sure.
Mr.
Well, yeah. Although the degrees work differently in medicine in England, right? So I don't.
Anyway.
I can't give you a guide to all of that. I just know they're different. So, a physician is not necessarily a doctor, right? He's a trained physician.
It's different.
Don't worry about it. So, but back in the day, people would typically, Episcopalians would typically call their ministers Mister. Mister last name. It's gotten less formal in general, like our whole society. And I think there's something in that, but there's also something in the personal relational bit of calling someone by their first name, right? So what I tell people is, it's when you're ordained, it's kind of like being knighted. You go from Mr. Dickinson to Father Garrin, right?
That's a good way to put it.
So yeah, because the office is relational by nature, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So of course, someone who didn't know me and just knew my name and that I was a priest would call me Father Dickinson, probably. Right? And that's fine too.
Well, respect.
It's just a matter of what people think of as respectful and what they don't, right? The guy who called Bob Duncan Bob, right, was not being disrespectful.
No.
Like, he loved the guy, right? he had all kinds of respect for him. It was just, he didn't think it was disrespectful to call him Bob.
That's true.
Right? And so he called him Bob. And Bob didn't bother about it, right? Because it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter, yeah.
I'm much more interested in what you do than and how you respond to what I ask than what you call me, right? So
that's true.
That's what.
And like you say, the times have changed. We used to almost call everybody by their last name.
That's right.
With
That's
any,
right. Yeah.
You know, unless
Yeah,
they
the
were
only
our brother
people
or
who,
sister or whatever.
Yeah, the only people who get that anymore are school teachers,
Yeah.
right?
And it's funny because I do mentoring, and the school teachers are still called by Ms., but all the mentors, we're all older than the school teacher, and they call us Janice, and,
Right.
and whatever.
You need me?
Do you want a Coke for the processional and the chasuble on the bread?
Please.
Thank you.
But Father, I sort of thought all this myself, my personal thing, because
Yeah.
I don't like to be called Ms. because I'm a widow.
Right.
And that's very important to me. That's what I am, and I'm married,
Yes.
but I'm a widow.
Yes.
And then I'm a teacher, and so I didn't want to be called Miss Suzelle.
That's
Right.
true too.
So,
Right.
so therefore, I
It's
thought
Mrs.
all this
Poole.
time I'm Mrs. Poole.
Or
And
Madame
now
Poole.
I'm Madame Poole, which
Right.
is the same as Mrs.
Right.
And
So, yeah, when we get into the whole feminist issue and the titles, that gets wacky, right?
Semantics.
I had a professor in college who insisted on being called Mrs. Davids.
Why?
She had a doctorate, but she was Mrs. Davids. That's how she wanted to be known.
My goodness.
Right? I never got close enough to her to say, so why? But
Probably reflected what was more important to her. More important to her identity.
her identity that she was married to Mr. Davids.
Mrs.
Respect you.
Davids,
It's respect.
comma, PhD.
Right. Exactly.
Respect.
Exactly.
Respect.
So, and she may have had a little bit of issue with the what do you call it? Dr. Davids, right?
Oh.
When I was first ordained, the people I arrived, and like 3 weeks later I was ordained a deacon.
Yeah.
Okay, I arrived in my first parish, and then I was deacon. So the rector had instructed everyone very carefully that I would be Mr. Dickinson when I arrived, but I would be Deacon Dickinson after my ordination.
Wow.
And I very quickly put a stop to that.
My
Deacon Dickinson. So that just was a mouthful. I said, you can call me Deacon Garrin if you want. So that's these things are always fluid, right? So it's always the case that someone is going to be a little more traditional in their address than others. And the question really is when you're dealing with someone you're addressing or is addressing you, the question is really, are you being respectful or not, right? And how respectful, right? So, I mean, we all know that when we're addressed in a certain way, we're addressed in terms of a certain relationship, right? My wife calls me Garrin, and we're not thinking about the fact that I'm a priest, right? If one of you says, so, Garrin, right? That's a completely different thing, right?
We might do that one.
And you might do that one. So, yeah.
don't you think we've lost something, though, if the cashier says to Janice, thank you, Janice, I mean, they should have respect for it.
Yeah, I think most people, at least here, I don't hear that very much. If someone addresses me by name, like a cashier, it's usually Mr. Dickinson.
Yes, me too. It's come that way. They look at my age.
And I think up north, when I lived up north, and we didn't have the yes or no sir kind of stuff, I think they just didn't address me by name at all. Right? So, yeah.
You have to deal with it.
Yeah. So I don't think I've had anyone like in a service capacity just say, so Garrin, here you go. Although that might come, who knows?
I always think it's funny at the doctor. You know, they call out your first name, but we have to call the doctor doctor.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
The younger generation is making some changes in all this too.
Yes.
I was in a sandwich shop several months ago, and the girl looked up at me and she said, "Why do you have that white thing around your neck?" And I said, "Because I'm a priest." And she says, "Oh, what's that?"
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
Sad.
That's the point at which you can start explaining, though. That's,
My goodness.
Evangelism.
you've got virgin territory there, right?
Exactly.
Nobody else has messed it up for you.
Yes.
I'm sure Father had a very kind response.
I'm sure he did.
Probably
I'm
in the
a-
20s.
Yeah.
There are people who aren't familiar.
Who aren't familiar at all.
With anything like that.
Yeah.
So one thing, if you show up somewhere in your clerical garb, nobody has to remember your name. They can just say Father.
They could just say Father.
Yep.
That's right. Makes it easy. That's what I like about going to church gatherings, is I don't have to remember anybody's name.
I always wonder, the people that doesn't know this, don't know the connotation of what the symbolic of what somebody has.
Yeah, I mean it's funny, right? Because you can be unaware of that stuff by being unfamiliar with it, or you can be unaware of that stuff by being too familiar with it, right?
Oh, wow.
I mean, how many of you have thought in the last month about the fact that what this means is that I've turned my collar around against the world, right? We don't think about that because it's just normal. It just means you're a priest.
Hasn't crossed my mind lately.
Right. But that's what it means. So in the 19th century, right, when people started doing this, all collars were detachable.
Oh.
All collars were buttoned on to the shirt.
They the only part that got cleaned really good.
Well, that's right, yeah. So you boil the collars and right? So, so what priests of the Church of England in the Catholic revival, right, decided to wear their collars backward as a sign of their rejection of the world.
No kidding.
Right. So that's why we wear backwards collars. You don't think of them as backwards collars because you don't think of shirts as not having collars.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's what this is just a real shirt with a real collar turned backwards.
My goodness, never knew that all my life.
You just can't buy those anymore regularly. But I will tell you this, I have worn this the other way around with a tie.
Really?
Yeah.
I never did that.
Is it?
Well, there's an opening back here, right? So if you just if you button it on the correct way and put a tie on it,
Good to go.
there you go.
Good to go.
So I have a white clerical shirt, with band collar shirt, with French cuffs and all of that, and so I've worn that. So I've worn that as formal wear, both with the backwards collar and then, like, if I'm going to some Scottish thing and I want to wear my kilt and a tie, I'll turn it around and I can still wear my cufflinks.
That is Education 101.
There you go.
Tell me about the clerical kilt. I find that to be
The clerical kilt?
very curious. I find it very curious.
So the clerical kilt is an invention of my own.
I thought they really had clerical kilts in Scotland.
Well, okay, so yes and no. So, oh wow, where's it going? All kinds of things. So, all right, so in order to understand that, you have to understand the history of tartan. Okay? Tartan is the fabric with the you would call it plaid.
Yes.
But the plaid is actually a garment.
It's like a
Okay, it's like a shawl.
My goodness.
Okay, that's a plaid. So you wear a kilt and a plaid. right? Or you wear a great kilt where the plaid is built in. Like you just take the end of it and you pull it up over your shoulders. Okay?
Wow.
So, but most of the kilts you know of are filibegs, right? They're little kilts, which means the top half has been cut off, okay, and it's just the bottom part. And so that's what we know usually as the kilt.
Yeah.
So the tartan was not standardized for any particular thing before the 19th century.
Recently.
Yeah. So before that, tartan was a thing, right? I mean, if you see drawings of Scotsmen before the 19th century, they will have tartan on, although not in the 13th century. So Braveheart is wrong, okay? But they didn't necessarily mean anything in particular, okay? Oh. In the 19th century, they started doing, tartans that belonged to people, right? Or were for various purposes. So you've got a bunch of different kinds. You've got clan tartans, right? Mm-hmm. So if you are a member of a clan, then you can wear that. I mean, technically, there's no legal reason you can't wear it, even if you're not a member of the clan, right? Lots of people wear lots of tartans for lots of reasons. But I like to have some sort of reason for the tartan I'm wearing. Okay. Yeah. So now there are tartans that don't belong to anyone. They're just, some of them are called fashion tartans, right? And some of them are really nice. Some of them are district tartans. Okay, so, the city of Glasgow, there's a Glasgow tartan.
Dedication.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there are also professional tartans. Okay.
Is that a different plaid?
A different tartan.
Yeah.
The tartan is the pattern, yes. So one of the earliest, so people who study tartans can trace them back to various pattern books that weavers had, right, and that haberdashers had after a while, right, and they had various names, right, but originally those were just put together for particular shops or particular weavers, right, and so they would just name them.
But isn't it everyone that belongs to each of different families?
Well, that comes afterward.
I have a picture.
Right. Yeah. So this is, that's not a Royal Stewart.
That's a regular one, right?
I think it's I forget which one that is. Anyway, not all tartans belong to clans. That's my point. Right? Yeah. There are lots and lots of clan tartans, and that's great. There are also ones that are used for multiple purposes. So, particularly when you have newer clans. So, one of the earliest named tartans that we have, not the earliest, but one of the earliest, from one of the earliest collections, is a tartan called Priest.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Really? And that develops into a clergy tartan. There are several different varieties of the versions of this with slightly different weaving. But one of the versions of that tartan, the clergy tartan, was picked up by Clan Clark. Wow. Because it's the same word, clergy, Clark.
So is that what you wear?
That's one of the ones I wear. Yeah. That's the blue and black and white one that I wear. So that's Clan Clark. And like I say, there are a couple of different versions of that tartan. That one's the easiest to get in the fabric that my kilt is made out of. If I were to get a nicer kilt, then it would probably be a different pattern of that tartan.
I've got an idea.
Clan Clark was an individual, was a guy?
No, it's a clan. It's a family. Right. But it's a later one. It's not one of the ones that comes from, 1700 or before. It's like a 19th century kind of, hey, we're a clan too. Yeah, it's Clan Clark. What should we use as a tartan? Well, there's this Clark tartan. So we'll use the Clark tartan.
Wonderful color or something. Queen Victoria, of course, loved her island.
Oh yeah, this is the big deal in the 19th century.
So then they would have to wear probably a special one for the bagpipe, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also true that the various Scottish regiments have tartans, which obviously they wear in their kilts. I think they're only using a couple of them now. I mean, there are all kinds of things you can get into with tartan. There's the only U.S. regiment that had a tartan was I'm going to get this wrong, I think it was the 29th New York in the Civil War.
That makes sense.
29th Infantry. It was raised during the Civil War, and they adopted a particular tartan that was a military tartan in Scotland, right? So that's one that I will eventually wear. Don't have one in that yet, but because it's a military tartan. Now it's a Cameron tartan as well, but it's not the Cameron clan tartan. It's Clamorn of Erech, which was originally designed for the Cameron who raised the regiment of Cameron Highlanders, I think.
Wow.
And so it's a military tartan, even though it's called Cameron of Erech. So I'll wear that one because I'm not Clan Cameron.
I've got an Irish kilt.
Yeah, no, there are Irish kilts, and the whole thing with Irish tartans is that, well, historically there's no such thing, okay? So what happened is in the 19th century, there was a pan-Celtic movement in Ireland where they were looking for ways to distinguish themselves from the English. And one of the things they did was they looked at some old paintings of Irish people who looked like they were wearing some sort of skirt type thing.
Yeah.
It turns out that's more of a tunic thing, and it was dyed saffron. And so if you see somebody in a saffron, like an gorgeous yellow kilt, they kind of picked that up and said, this is the kind of kilt we wore. And then a bunch of people did. So I have a saffron kilt too. It's an Irish kilt.
I'm blues and greens.
Yes. And there are various district tartans and city tartans, right, from there as well. So you can find all these things. You can go ahead and design a tartan, right? You can go and, there are websites, you can do this for free. And they have software where you can put in the stripes that you want, and it'll show you how it looks when you weave it the right way,
But it has
right?
to be different from any other.
But it has to be different from anything else. Well, it doesn't. You can do that no matter what you're doing. Like I could reproduce something on that software. But in order to register it with the Scottish Tartans Authority, isn't that funny? That there is such a thing. So in order to register it, but it has to be different, and it has to be woven. You have to have actually woven it.
It might belong to somebody else's family when you make it.
Right. But if you look historically, it's just more fluid than all that, right? The Scottish Tartans Authority doesn't have any legal authority, right? They're just kind of the group that,
They do things.
They're sort of volunteer crossing guards, right? So, yeah.
I'm trying to get clear because you said,
Yes.
to me, tartan was always the design.
Yes.
And the kilt is the skirt.
Yes.
Then what is plaid? You said it was the shawl?
The plaid is like the shawl,
So if
The things that
plaid
goes
is
over your
not a
shoulders.
design, it is
It is a
basic garment. So what
Yes.
about the sash? Is that the same thing?
That's just a sash.
Oh. All right.
That's a later development for somebody who, for instance, for a woman who wants to wear her tartan,
Plus,
plus whatever she's going to wear.
yeah.
But the bagpipes makes it softer too, doesn't it?
I'm not sure about
Oh,
that.
no, I'm not either. I just saw that picture of him.
No,
with
and the
bagpipes.
plaid, a lot of times you'll see a formal plaid, like if a piper is wearing a plaid, right? He'll be wearing a kind of a symbolic plaid that kind of comes over his shoulder and is pinned here,
Right.
right? But originally it was
Cover.
a cover-up,
Cover.
right?
Keep warm,
Like a cloak.
to keep
Yeah.
warm. And cold is.
And originally it was part of the kilt. It was originally a kilt was just
One shot.
an 8 by, an 8 foot by 4 foot
It's big.
blanket,
Big.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you laid down a belt and you pleated it up so that it wasn't too big, and you laid down and you belted it around yourself, and then you had this long piece, falling down the back, or you could pull that up over your shoulders. Now we call that a great kilt, fitting more.
What did you say about cutting off the bottom? I didn't understand.
You pleat it up.
No, but you said it was long.
Oh yeah, so the top half of that is hanging down behind your belt.
Oh.
The bottom half pleats into a skirt that comes to the knee,
Yeah.
and then the upper half falls on the other side of the belt down the back.
Wow.
That becomes your.
So you pleat it in the middle. I can't believe I'm teaching you that Scottish accent. So the great kilt is like 4 foot high,
It's wide.
right? Or wide, right? And you lay it out and you pleat it through the middle of it,
Yeah.
right? And then the middle of it is belted around the waist.
Is that the one that has the seam down the front part of the pleat, going down the front?
So originally there wouldn't have been any seams, right? So today a kilt is a tailored garment. Originally it wasn't. It was just a 4x8 blanket that you put on, right? So, but it's easier to wear particularly if you want it to lay nicely, right? It's easier to wear if you sew all those pleats in and you can cut off the excess on the inside and you can pleat it in a particular pattern, so you can pleat it to the stripe or you can pleat it to the set.
Puts a kilt in.
The set is actually the pattern of the tartan.
Well, it was very interesting because I've been doing some research on quilts and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
I run across one that's kilts and quilts.
Yeah.
I've got to find out what that is. That was amazing. Kilts and quilts.
Yeah. So the word kilt actually comes from the
Saxons, right?
well, yeah, never mind.
Does Holy Nativity have St. Andrew celebration?
We don't do a big thing for St. Andrews. The Scottish thing is not so much Holy Nativity as it is the Dickinsons. So we could, if anybody wanted to. I'd be happy to do it.
Fun to do.
Yeah.
When I was doing meat inspection, I was able to get a stomach, and we made haggis, and we had scotch, and we had
Awesome.
pipers and stuff.
Can we skip the haggis?
Haggis is good if it's made right.
If it's made right.
Yeah.
Who's the Scottish poet? We celebrate that.
Oh,
I was just looking, are there any other choir members in here?
Are we supposed to be doing something?
I think you're supposed to be doing
Today
something.
we are, it's our last day to be in the
Okay.
lawn. Though I may not ask you to vest because it's awfully hot.
Yeah.
Who wrote
Excuse me.
Let's go.
Bye.
Okay.
the Rolling Tree, Rocky Lady and all that Rolling Tree?
Oh, Burns. Robbie Burns.
Robbie Burns, and we celebrate Robbie Burns and the haggis and all that
Mhm.
stuff. Oh, I love haggis.
The address to the haggis.
And singing.
It's all fun.
Singing all the lines.
Haggis is not my favorite thing, but if it's made right, it's like a.
Tolerable.
It's just no. I actually like it if it's made right.
You have to have
It's
a
never going to
sauce
be
to
like
shake it
candy,
down, so it's
but
not.
yeah, it's like a sausage. It's like a soft sausage.
Yeah.
Kind of like liverwurst,
Okay.
but I like that. So.
Yeah.
So, all right, have we beaten the Scottish dress thing today?
No, it's very informative. I learned a lot from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I know how we got that. We got that too from, got to there from formal address stuff. Yeah, that's right.
Well,
Yes, sir.
in the midst of all the kilts,
Yes.
I was ruminating about something. The titles and all those things we get.
Mm-hmm.
A priest from my old diocese wrote me a letter. It was just a note, really, but with a great big long envelope.
Uh-huh.
And he had written on this envelope,
Yes.
the Venerable John W. Klein, Archdeacon and sometime Archdeacon and sometime Canon of the Diocese of Northwestern Pennsylvania. It took 2 lines of a long envelope.
Oh my goodness.
And then the address, right?
Oh, it was so funny.
So important.
I'm telling you, that is very, very good.
Yeah.
He had a real sense of humor.
Yeah, these things can get ridiculous. On the other hand, in a informal address, you don't want to slight anybody either.
No, you don't. You don't want to do that.
Most of us don't care that much, but
Yeah.
it keeps all the diocesan riffraff in line, right? So.
But he's just trying to acknowledge you, Father.
But Nancy Darley calls you John. She says John.
John, yes.
Nancy Darley. Nancy Darley. She's 104. And she calls you John.
Yes, yeah, I get that a lot, yeah.
But she says it.
That's my name.
That's my husband's name too.
How is she doing?
Oh, fine. She's wonderful. Yes, she comes to Father Klein's. And she reads.
She normally comes to the Tuesday service.
And she
Yeah.
reads it all. And she's
She'll be 105 next month.
amazing. She's walking with a walker. Yes. And she knows me.
Yeah,
She
she's
said
very
that she
good.
doesn't have to be married, but she remembers me. Wonderful. Yes. I've known her since she was 16. No, since I was 16.
I've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm not going to try and move to another question that would take us another half hour. But any other questions about formal address, address in general, Scottish clothing, any of that?
Scotch?
Scotch? I can talk about Scotch too.
How people get that mixed up, huh?
What?
Instead of saying Scottish and Scotch.
Oh, right.
Two different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like the history of it, what you just depicted.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It gets me thinking.
Right. Well, it's kind of like it's kind of like liturgy, right?
My goodness.
Like you can say there's a right way to do something, but if you're honest, historically it hasn't always been the way to do it, right? And so those of us who are trying to be Catholic are kind of looking back as far as we can, right? Which is, in certain instances, is really far back, right? So we've got some parts of our liturgy that we know are around in the 3rd or 4th century, right?
Yeah.
But it's not set in stone the way some people would say, right? So the difference, you've heard this joke, what's the difference between a liturgist and a terrorist? You can reason with the terrorist,
Yes.
right? I mean, you do get that sometimes.
Right.
It's like there is a way to do this, and I'm sometimes guilty of that too. Like, why are they doing that, right? On the other hand, there's sort of a balance to be kept, right, between what will work for us and remembering that we are a part of this centuries-long tradition. Like, you can't just make this stuff up as you go along.
That's true.
What do
right?
you think about the Pope changing the Lord's Prayer?
Actually, so this is one of my pet peeves with right to in our prayer book. Okay? Oh, wait a minute. It's not going to be what you think it is. It's that they never use the right to translation of the Lord's Prayer, and it's the only part of right to that's a better translation. So, I use right one. I'm a traditionalist. We're just going to use the older language. But to be fair, that is a better translation of the Greek.
Well, it's hard to think
To
about
save us from the time of
God.
trial, that sort of thing.
It's hard to think about God leading anyone into temptation.
Right. Although, think of it as, well, what if you were crossing the desert and you needed a guide?
Wow,
Right?
That'd be tough.
Don't
Tough.
don't lead us between the oases. Lead us with the oases,
Yeah.
right? Lead us to the oases. Don't get us lost, right? And of course, we know that God won't, but that doesn't mean it's wrong for us to pray it. Just like "Hallowed be Thy name," right? I mean, it is. He doesn't need us to do it, right? On the other hand, it's appropriate for us to say it. So there's that. But it's really save us from the time of trial is a little better.
Okay.
So actually, it drives me nuts when we're doing right to, right to, folk, and then we get to the Lord's Prayer where it would be good to use right to, and they go, oh, we can't do that. People would be offended. And so they just use it. Everybody has it memorized the other way, right? And so they don't.
But it's one of those nice things that Christians have in common.
Right.
I mean,
right. Even the Roman Catholics use the Anglican translation, right, of the Lord's Prayer. So that is true.
But why is it so debatable? Why is it so debatable with this right one or right two? Why people get so...
The only real reason is that the liturgists in the 1970s were trying to get rid of people like me.
Is that true?
They were trying to just phase us out.
I didn't
Right?
know that.
So, think about it. What services are not available in Rite 1 in our prayer book?
Oh, there we go.
The funeral service is,
Yes.
but the baptismal service, all the new stuff, right? So the Easter Vigil and all of that, not available in Rite 2, or in Rite 1.
Omitted.
It's all Rite 2.
Omitted.
Yeah. Marriage and baptism.
Is the right
So are only Rite 2. So their assumption was that anyone younger was going to always want to use Rite 2.
right?
Because we all know that younger people like modern stuff more.
Yeah, that's true. Psychological.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just for these old fuddy-duddies that are going to eventually die off that we will keep the Rite 1 in there just to keep them happy for now.
Yeah.
And eventually we can just drop all of that, go to the Rite 2, and that'll, at the next revision, we can do that.
Is the author did that? Is the author did that, or is just all that was designed to cause this conflict?
I don't see how it could not be designed that way, given the fact that we're given Rite 1 for some services and not for others.
Wow.
Right? Somebody thought that through.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Now, it may not have been a nefarious thing. They may just have assumed that anyone younger is going to want to use Rite 2. So don't bother to give them the services in the Rite 1 language.
Wow.
Which was a really bad assumption,
Yeah.
but it would have been typical of the 1970s. So,
Listen to that.
Could you use, is it permissible to use one of the earlier services? Say you wanted to get married and you wanted to use, is that permissible or you have to use?
you have to get permission from the bishop.
But we have to ask you or
So we just like the
I would have
28
asked the
prayer
bishop.
book?
the bishop?
What
gotta
would
go
you
to the
do?
bishop.
So, okay, so there's Rite 1 and Rite, oh, you mean what we do for the Rite 1
marriage.
services for marriage? Yes. So there is a rubric that's buried in the rubrics in the
What's a
Book of
rubric?
Common Prayer in
What
the
is that?
1979. A rubric is like a direction,
Or direction?
right? So there's a rubric buried in there that says, you can do any of these services in more contemporary languages if you want.
Right.
We have taken that to mean, well, you could do any of them in more traditional languages if you want to, since it seems to not matter.
Yeah.
And there was a whole book put together by my parish where I did a curacy called the Anglican Service Book. And it was all the 1979 Book of Common Prayer. We joke about it being cranmerized, right? So we put the these and nows back in and all of that, and put some of the 28 language back in that was taken out. So there are some little phrases like in some of the prayers, the post-communion prayer and the, prayer of humble access, I think. Anyway, so we put them back in. But it also does almost all the Rite 2 stuff in more traditional language. So we could do, the Rite 2 prayer, Eucharistic prayer D, if we wanted to, in more traditional language, if we use that book. I am of the opinion that we should stick to to the actual prayer book tradition, which means the Rite 1, prayer 1
Yes.
service. So that's what we do here. But you can get away with taking those services and just putting them into more traditional language. And someone's already done it for us.
Yes.
We don't have to make that up.
Interesting.
But
Wow.
you're more traditional, what do you mean?
More traditionally?
You are more traditional.
Yes, I am.
So that's
You
right,
are.
one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that is the Book of Common Prayer tradition. My contention is that Rite 2 has departed from the Common Prayer tradition
Yeah.
in a few ways. And it's not the lack of these and thous,
Yeah.
it's other things, but
He said, it's so interesting what you said about the history and stuff. I don't understand why every year that more people from our church attended the Classics Week, because it was so interesting. That was going to the history.
well, that's a different issue, but yeah. I mean, the girls do lots of history, and they were running around the courtyard, recreating the Peloponnesian War, I think, or something.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And
it was fun.
discussions and basis about everything. It's fascinating.
I have provided my children with the education that I wish I had had. And so they know a lot more than I do now about some things.
They really know that.
I still have a leg up in theology, but
But they were mostly children from other places. They were not
Yeah.
from our church.
Lots of homeschoolers and other Christian classical private schools and
We should
stuff
know
like that.
it's fascinating.
I can reflect on the Rite